Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and it's time for another draft post-mortem. For those of you who are new to these videos, maybe you saw the I review all draft formats I've ever played video a couple of weeks ago. These are what I do now at the end of a mainline standard draft format. I do a big breakdown of the mechanics and the set overall, and the good and the bad, and how I felt about it, if I would draft it again, my favorite card, my least favorite card, etc., and a bunch of awards at the end of the video. But yeah, today we're going to talk about War of the Spark. So War of the Spark, when the release date was finally announced, which took a long time, I immediately looked at the calendar and I said, whoa, this isn't around for very long until Modern Horizons is out, and then that's not around very long until Core Set 2020 is out. And everybody's been kind of feeling that lately. My assumption was that Wizards wasn't necessarily confident this was going to be a great draft format, and I'm not confident that it was either. But let's start with the mechanics and break down how the mechanics worked in the set. There weren't many because, of course, the majority of the complexity was taken up by the Planeswalkers themselves. But at first was a mass, a really cool little mechanic that was tacked onto spells. It was very easy to grok. You had a bounce spell, but it amassed one. You had a mind rot, but it amassed. Actually, there was no mind rot. There was a divest, or whatever you want to call it, a duress instead. It wasn't duress, it was Thoughtseize. It was very simple and very straightforward, and I rather liked it. I think it was really cool. I think taking away the ability to make a 1/1 or to put the counter on something else was a good idea, just always making it that one token getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It was very flavorful of the zombie army getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I know people originally and possibly still said it wasn't flavorful because they should be going wide, but strength also represents an army. An army could be a 12/12, or it could be 12 1/1s. I really liked Amass. I thought it was cool. We're probably not going to see it come back because it's written into the actual rules that it makes a zombie army token. We're not going to see a mass of a Roman army taking something down. It's just going to be zombies. But of course, we do have a main character who might make a zombie army at some point in the future, so we could see it come back if Liliana ever decides that's something she wants to do. But yeah, I liked Amass. I thought it was totally fine. It wasn't like a home run mechanic. It's not going to go down in the halls of best mechanics of all time, but it was totally fine. Proliferate was the only other named mechanic, a returning mechanic from New Phyrexia, I believe. I'm pretty sure New Phyrexia. I don't think it was in the other Scars of Mirrodin block, or Mirrodin Besieged block, or whatever that block was called. I didn't really play with it, so this was my first time really getting to experience Proliferate as anything other than a random card from a Master's set or in a Canlander deck or whatever. And it is a cool mechanic, but I don't really like how it played out in War of the Spark. I think it introduced very snowbally games. The blue-green Proliferate deck, where suddenly you were just slamming counters on everything non-stop, while your opponent just kind of sat there and twiddled their thumbs wondering when it would finally be over, was not great. It was very fun for that one player, and that's something we'll come back to in this post-mortem, is War of the Spark was fun for one person at a time. And I really like my draft formats to have both players having fun. So in New Phyrexia, I don't know how many +1/+1 counters there were, or if there were any, because there were -1/-1 counters. So you would have a lot of cards that were like, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature, then Proliferate. And so Proliferate was almost an aggressive removal sort of mechanic, rather than a build up my own army mechanic. And I think it would have played out a lot better as that. I have a history of not really liking Wizards and their take on +1/+1 counters. It tends to be very snowbally, and that was exactly what happened here. So it was a cool mechanic. I'd really like to see it kind of in the New Phyrexia style of being used against your opponent a little bit more than just building your own stuff, because oh boy, was it snowbally in this set. And that brings us to the other mechanic of the set, Planeswalkers. All the Planeswalkers, 36 of the Planeswalkers at every rarity except for common. The Mythic Planeswalkers. Cool, great. They were basically normal. They had a static ability which was slightly abnormal, but they were cool, they were powerful, they were what a Mythic Planeswalker should be. Let's jump down to the uncommon Planeswalkers. They were a very cool design. I pretty much called this way back when I said if they do uncommon walkers, I bet they would be like sagas, and they were very much like sagas. I liked that some of them had, 2 activations and then stuck around. Some of them you could activate right down to death. Some of them had 3 activations, like Arlen, for example. And of course, the static that all Planeswalkers had was another added level of complexity. Perhaps a little bit too much. I really feel for the people who sat down and said, I want to learn what this draft thing is. And this was their first draft set, because, oh boy, there was a lot to keep track of. But the issue with the uncommon walkers is there was just way too many of them. Way too many, because there was a planeswalker in every pack, because a large chunk of them were great, and like the worst ones were still generally good. You ended up with these decks that had a bunch of them, and much like Proliferate snowballing, the same thing happened with planeswalkers. I had a lot of games where my opponent went turn 3 planeswalker, turn 4 planeswalker, and I hadn't played one yet, and I was just out of the game. I was so dead because so much value was going to be generated by my opponent. And boy, if they got a 3rd or 4th planeswalker, that was just the end of it. So there was way too many of these because they were way too good. And so you just ended up with these super imbalanced decks. Yes, technically everybody had the chance to maybe, if they were lucky, get all of those. But I don't care about that. I care about all of my games wrapped together. And if a bunch of my games were unfun, snowbally, my opponent just running me over, I'm not going to like the format very much. The rare planeswalkers had all of these problems and more. Having a plus, and especially the +2 walkers, Sorin, Ralzeric, they got out of control really, really, really fast. They stuck around, they were way harder to kill, they were way more powerful than the uncommon ones generally, and again, too many of them. There were 15 rare walkers, maybe something around that number. And so the times where you would face a deck that had 2 rare walkers was too much. So these planeswalkers were way too overrepresented, and I'm not one of the people who says, oh, Magic was so much better before planeswalkers. I think they're a cool little card design, but there were too many here, and it just led to way too many snowbally, massively outvalued, very quick games of Magic where, again, one player had a lot of fun. The one other mechanic, or I guess cycle, that I'll talk about is the gods. I don't like the gods, and I'm actually not a big fan of color-complete, powerful mythic or rare cycles. I'm not a fan of, well, there's this big scary dinosaur on Ixalan, but we can't just have green have that. Every color needs that, so we've got to make 4 of them. Because now suddenly you go from having 1 super powerful card to having 5, which means they appear way more often in a draft. I don't care about every color getting their powerful god or their powerful elder dragon or their powerful elder dinosaur or whatever. You cannot do those color complete cycles. Maybe there are just so many people who will complain and yell and scream that if they don't have their blue elder dinosaur, the game of Magic is dead, but I think it makes for a worse draft experience when you have these large numbers of very similar super powerful cards. Now, the gods themselves are way beyond even that. The exile zone no longer mattering, because if they were exiled, whatever, they go back in the deck. Being basically unable to kill them permanently, having to basically play blue, because the easiest ways to kill them were countering them, blue, milling them, blue, or using Kasmina's Transmutation, blue. And, yeah. The gods were way too powerful, and then, for whatever reason, Oketra was made. Why she made black zombies, why she made 4/4 zombies, why those zombies had vigilance, why it was for every single creature cast, I don't know. Oketra is a mistake of a card. I honestly think she's worse than Scarab God. Maybe not in Constructed, but in Draft she felt way worse than Scarab God ever did, and that already felt really bad. I really want to go back to Theros-style gods. Being turned on by devotion meant that it was really easy to interact with the god being on or off. These versions of the gods especially were just always on, and that's a massive problem. I also much prefer Indestructible as opposed to this kill them however you want, they come back style of indestructible. Just mistakes of cards. I never want them to happen again. I honestly am afraid of going back to Theros in case they don't power the gods down. So yeah, please stop printing cards like this. It's not good for Limited. Even at Mythic, because again, we have 5 of them. That means that per draft, I think I did the math, and I think it was 1 will show up on average every single 8-man draft. Whereas if there was, 1 god that was super powerful, it would only show up like 1 in every 5 drafts. So War of the Spark, it's not a set that I super enjoyed. It's interesting because I did enjoy it much more on MTGO, and the bit that I did in paper I enjoyed more than Arena. Arena is rapidly becoming my least favorite way to play Limited Magic, or Magic in general. I could do a whole video on that, on paper versus digital Magic. And in fact, if you go and listen to Arena Athletes, Travis and David talked about this in a hyperbolic way, with one defending each side. And I'm definitely on the paper is better side of things. So that means that I'm unlikely to play this format ever again. It's probably not going to come back to MTGO. We're not going to draft it at the store in paper ever again. I doubt, unless somebody really wants to. And when it comes back on Arena in ranked draft, I'm just going to stop playing Arena for those 2 weeks, as I've done these past 2 weeks that it's been the ranked draft format, which is not true. I did try to grind it. I'm currently trying to hit Mythic again, and I think I'm like 10 drafts straight of going 0-3, 1-3, or 2-3. I literally can't win, and so much of it just seems to be that my opponent's decks are insanely overpowered, and that's just kind of an Arena thing. That's not necessarily a War of the Spark thing, but it's helped out because of the ludicrous power level of War of the Spark. So because with War of the Spark, basically one player gets to have fun and the other player gets to wonder if they should quit Magic, I just don't think I can ever come back to this format. It's not a format that I want to play again. There's been an idea bandied around, I think Ben Stark originally said it, that the format would be a lot better if they took kind of the top 15 mythics and rares and just ripped them out. Take out the gods, take out most if not all of the rare planeswalkers, and you probably actually have a pretty good format. Because there were times where if your decks were evenly matched, and they were evenly matched without gods or ludicrous planeswalkers, sometimes both players had fun. Sometimes. So I'd actually kind of like to see that. I almost want to somehow attempt that. I don't know how you would do that. It would probably have to be on a third-party Magic program. But I would actually like to see a modified War of the Spark with some of the huge power taken out. Anyways, that's going to bring us to the awards section, I guess we'll call it, of this video, where I just kind of go over some quick hits of best archetype and best card and worst card, etc. Best archetype. So the best archetype for me, my favorite archetype, was Blue-Green Proliferate. I absolutely loved it. When it went off, it just felt completely unfair, and it was. Worst archetype. Worst archetype was basically anything white, but specifically black-white. When your signpost uncommon card is Cruel Celebrant, you know you're going to have a bad time. The most overrated card. Most overrated card at the moment that I'm recording this video is probably Ashiok. People were down on Ashiok, as is appropriate, and then they decided that no, Ashiok's actually great because they lost to it once or twice. And so everybody started to draft it, started to say it was a top tier card. Tier lists, that's another video. And frankly, no, I don't think Ashiok has ever been that great. They require Teferi's Time Twist to bounce it, or they require Proliferate or something to go on for you to even have a chance of milling your opponent out fully, and not milling your opponent out fully does not win you the game. And if your opponent interacts with Ashiok in any way, hits them even once, your plan goes completely down the toilet. The most underrated card. Most underrated card is 100% Kiora. I know Ethan from Lords of Limited is very much on the Kiora is good train, or at least he was last time I hopped on his stream. Kiora is great. So many people read her static ability and say, oh, well, she's only good in like red-green Stompy. Her static ability is a bonus. The fact that she ramps is huge and super helpful. She's got 7 loyalty, so she's going to live. You're going to get value out of her. Combining her with something like New Horizons is just nutty. Kiora is great. I think she's one of the better uncommon planeswalkers. I don't know why people don't see that.
The biggest groan test.
The biggest groan test card, you know exactly what this is. It's Oketra. Seeing that card come down on the other side of the table basically meant the game was over. Yes, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, well, you can beat the gods, you can beat Oketra. And sure, I remember the couple of times that I beat Oketra, but that's a small percentage of the time. And I didn't beat Oketra. My opponent not playing creatures after casting her allowed me to beat Oketra. So Oketra was the hugest groan test by far. She's possibly just the biggest mistake of a limited Magic card I've ever seen. Ever.
The rare I always wanted to open.
The rare I always wanted to open was Oketra, obviously. I like free wins, and Oketra definitely gets you free wins. As I said, if you follow her up with a creature, preferably more, you basically can't lose. It's basically impossible. The only way you're going to lose is to your deck not giving you creatures after you cast her. Easily the card I want to open.
The worst rare.
The worst rare? Silent Submersible. Just awful. I have no idea why it's a rare. Maybe they were just afraid of Smuggler's Copter, or they had that in their memory, but it was easily uncommon power level, and even then I still would never play it or want to see it. The crew cost was too high. It didn't have any evasion, which means you couldn't get through to activate its ability. Just an awful rare.
The most frustrating bad card to lose to.
Crush Descent is easily the most frustrating bad card. It's a card that you should never play. It's not good. It doesn't do anything. It does something in the exact situation where your opponent casts something and doesn't have 2 mana up, and you pay 4 mana for that, and you just assume that nobody's ever playing it because nobody ever should, and then you get got by it. Still, you should never assume someone's playing it unless you've already seen it. Such a frustrating bad card.
The fun rare I always wanted to open.
Bolas's Citadel is definitely the most fun that I've had with a card. I've only cast it a few times in a couple of drafts, but every time that I was able to do it with a life total, it just felt so good to just start peeling cards off the top, left, and right. The first time I cast this in draft, on one turn I cast an Eternal Skylord, a Bolas himself, a Kefnet, and a totally lost because I could and I wanted to bounce something. I went to 3 life, but my opponent conceded.
The card that got away.
The card that got away was Living Twister. I wanted to play this card. It looked really cool. It looked like the sort of grindy late game thing that I think I enjoy. I play a lot of really low curve aggro a lot of the times, but I think I enjoy getting to the late game and bouncing my lands and discarding my lands and drawing my lands and discarding my lands. And I really wanted to try that with Living Twister. I literally never got a chance to draft it. I don't know if I ever saw it pack 1, pick 1. I saw it a few times pack 3 where I was very not red-green. So wish I had a chance to play with it, but I'm not going to go back to this set to try it.
What card surprised me?
Toll of the Invasion surprised me, which is surprising, because I knew Callous Dismissal was going to be great. Over on the Limited Resources subreddit, I was fighting for that card so hard. Everybody was saying that it was terrible. It was nowhere near as good as any previous bounce. It was sorcery speed. It was absolutely bad. They were very wrong. I was very right. That card is, in fact, might be one of the best blue commons. Toll of the Invasion, for some reason, I completely wrote off, despite it being exactly the same thing. It's a spell that is okay-ish attached to a creature, which makes it totally solid. In fact, this is basically Brain Maggot from Theros, or Journey into Nyx, or Born of the Gods, or whatever set it was in from that block, except the card permanently goes away. I don't know why I didn't see that comparison, and if I had of, I would have known that this was a good card. Toll of the Invasion absolutely surprised me. If the pack was awful, I might first pick it. It's actually that good. So that's going to wrap it up for the War of the Spark post-mortem. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I want to know what you thought of all of those awards. What were your groan test cards, your favorite cards, your worst cards, etc.? What did you think of the format? I know there are some people out there who started out thinking it was bad and then said, no, this format's actually great. I'd like to hear from you because I don't agree. I hated this right through to the very end. So let me know your opinions, your thoughts, everything down in the comments below. I will not be doing one of these for Modern Horizons. I've enjoyed Modern Horizons, but I've only drafted it a few times, and I just won't have enough time to actually form real opinions on it other than it's fun and I'd like to try it again. But there's a new set already coming out because set review starts in 3 days. Something like that. On Tuesday, we're going to be doing our first set review video for Core Set 2020, which is insane. This release schedule has been real rough on me. So stay tuned for all of that. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me over on Twitch, Facebook, and the other one, Twitter. You can also find me over at patreon.com/ShamanLeek, where you can become a financial backer and help the channel out. The patrons, you guys absolutely keep this channel going, and you are super, super appreciated. You can go over to inkedgaming.com and use the promo code ManaLeek10, all one word, 10 as the number to get your 10% off the order and help out the channel. But if you do have questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all next time.